Welcome back to Stamps Us, the channel where we uncover the history, hidden details, and real-world collecting value of fascinating United States postage stamps. Today, we are looking at a beautiful and historically important stamp from 1932, featuring George Washington in his military uniform and famous cocked hat. If you have ever wondered whether an old 3-cent Washington stamp like this could be worth more than its original face value, stay with me, because this little piece of paper has a remarkable story. The stamp you are looking at is the 1932 United States 3-cent Washington bicentennial stamp, Scott Catalog number 708, printed in deep violet. It was issued to celebrate the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth. The stamp was released on January 1, 1932, as part of a 12-stamp Washington bicentennial series. The National Postal Museum confirms that the series presented different portraits of Washington based on famous works of art. The portrait on this particular 3-cent stamp is especially interesting. It is based on a painting of Washington by Charles Willson Peale, showing Washington at Valley Forge in 1777. Instead of presenting Washington as an older statesman, the design portrays him as a Revolutionary War military leader wearing his distinctive cocked hat and uniform. That gives this stamp a very different appearance from some of the other Washington stamps issued during the bicentennial celebration. Look closely at the design. Across the top are the words United States Postage. In the center is Washington's portrait, surrounded by detailed engraved lines. On either side of the portrait are the dates 1732 and 1932, marking the 200-year anniversary of Washington's birth. At the bottom is the large numeral 3 and the words 3 cents. The combination of the deep violet color, engraved portrait, classic typography, and commemorative dates makes this stamp instantly recognizable to collectors. The technical details are also important. Scott 708 was produced by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing using a rotary press, with perforations measuring approximately 11 by 10. Catalog and museum records identify the stamp as deep violet and list it as a commemorative issue. The National Postal Museum also identifies its Scott Catalog number as 708. Now here is where the story gets even more interesting. When the Washington bicentennial stamps were first released, the 2-cent Washington stamp was expected to be especially important because 2 cents was the normal first-class letter rate. But only a few months later, the first-class letter rate increased to 3 cents. Suddenly, 3-cent stamps became much more important for everyday mail. The post office responded with additional 3-cent production, and the demand for 3-cent Washington stamps became significant. The 3-cent bicentennial stamp itself was produced in a substantial quantity. One major catalog source records approximately 456 million stamps issued, although historical catalog figures can differ depending on how printing totals are recorded. This is one reason collectors should be careful when someone claims that every 1932 3-cent Washington stamp is automatically rare or worth thousands of dollars. So, what about the value? This is the question most collectors want answered. And the most important thing to understand is that age alone does not make a stamp extremely valuable. A stamp from 1932 can be over 90 years old and still have a relatively modest market value if it is common and in ordinary condition. Recent catalog and dealer information shows that a normal Scott 708 single can often be found for a relatively small amount. One current catalog source lists a mint never-hinged example around the sub-dollar range, while used examples can be even less. A 2025 U.S. stamp catalog lists Scott 708 at approximately $0.75 for mint never hinged and $0.25 used. Although actual selling prices vary depending on condition, centering, gum, provenance, and buyer demand. That means the stamp shown in today's video should not automatically be described as a $1,000, $5,000, or $10,000 stamp simply because it is old. In fact, many ordinary examples trade for well under a few dollars. Current marketplace examples also show ordinary Scott 708 stamps being offered or sold for small amounts. However, this does not mean you should ignore your stamp. Condition can make a dramatic difference in philately. Collectors examine the centering, perforations, color, gum, hinge condition, cancellation, paper quality, tears, creases, stains, thinning, and other defects. A stamp with bright original color, clean perforations, strong centering, intact gum, and no faults can be much more desirable than a damaged example. For a used stamp, look carefully at the cancellation. Is it light and unobtrusive, or does it cover Washington's face? Are the perforations complete? Has the stamp been torn from an envelope? Is there a crease running through the design? Any of these details can affect desirability. For an unused stamp, the gum is extremely important. Original gum with no hinge disturbance is generally more desirable than a stamp with heavy hinge marks or damaged gum. Never try to clean, wash, press, regum, or repair an old stamp yourself if you think it could be valuable. Amateur restoration can reduce a stamp's collector value rather than increase it. Another fascinating area is centering. Look at the white space surrounding the printed design. If the design is perfectly or exceptionally well centered between the perforations, that can make the stamp more attractive to serious collectors. High-quality examples with exceptional centering can command premiums over ordinary copies. There are also varieties and unusual production characteristics that collectors study. The Bureau of Engraving and Printing produced these stamps in large quantities, and specialists can examine plate numbers, printing characteristics, perforations, and other details. Plate blocks and larger multiples can be considerably more desirable than a single ordinary stamp. For example, current dealer listings show Scott 708 plate blocks carrying prices above ordinary single stamp values, and there is another important lesson for new collectors. Do not confuse Scott 708 with the later 3-cent Washington regular issue from 1932. They may look similar at first glance, but they are different stamps. The Washington bicentennial stamp shown here carries the commemorative 1732 and 1932 dates. The later 3-cent Washington regular issue used a different presentation and removed those date ribbons. The National Postal Museum specifically explains this distinction. That distinction can be extremely important when searching catalogs or comparing auction listings. If someone tells you that your stamp is Scott 720, for example, but your stamp clearly has the 1732 and 1932 commemorative dates, you should double-check the identification. The stamp in today's image matches the 1932 Washington bicentennial 3-cent design. Scott 708. Now let's talk about the historical story behind the image. Charles Willson Peale was one of the most important American portrait artists of the Revolutionary period. He created several portraits of Washington, and his work became the inspiration for multiple stamps in the 1932 Washington Bicentennial series. The 3-cent stamp uses the image of Washington associated with Valley Forge in 1777, emphasizing his role as commander of the Continental Army. This makes the stamp more than just an old piece of postage. It is a small historical artifact connecting American postal history, Revolutionary War history, American art, and the celebration of Washington's 200th birthday. Imagine receiving a letter in 1932 with this stamp attached. The United States was in the middle of the Great Depression. George Washington's bicentennial was being celebrated across the country, and millions of these stamps were being printed for the public. What was once an ordinary 3-cent postage stamp has now survived for more than 9 decades and become a collectible piece of American history. If you have one of these stamps at home, the first thing you should do is identify it correctly. Confirm that it is the 1932 Washington bicentennial issue. Check that it has the 1732 and 1932 dates. Verify the 3-cent denomination, and compare the perforations and color with a reputable catalog reference. To inspect the condition under good lighting. Do not rely only on a smartphone photograph. A collector or professional dealer may need to examine the paper, gum, perforations, centering, cancellation, and possible varieties before giving a serious valuation. And remember, online asking prices are not the same thing as actual market value. Anyone can list an old stamp online for $10,000, but that does not mean someone will actually pay $10,000 for it. For a realistic estimate, compare completed sales, recognized catalogs, established dealers, and auction results.so. What is the bottom line for the stamp shown in this video? The 1932 3-cent Washington bicentennial stamp, Scott 708, is an important and attractive historical U.S. commemorative stamp, but an ordinary example is generally a modest value collectible rather than an automatic fortune. Current catalog information places typical examples in the low dollar or sub-dollar range depending on condition and format, while better quality examples, plate blocks, unusual varieties, or professionally identified specialty items can bring higher prices. The real value of this stamp comes from understanding exactly what you have. Condition, centering, gum, perforations, cancellation, varieties, and whether it is a single, block, or plate block can all change the market picture. Next up, we are looking at one of the most legendary and famous stamps ever produced in the United States. At first glance, this may look like an ordinary old 20% airmail stamp from 1918, but look carefully at the airplane in the center. It is flying upside down. That tiny printing mistake created one of the greatest rarities in stamp collecting history. This is the legendary inverted Jenny. The story of the inverted Jenny begins in 1918, when the United States was preparing to launch its first regular airmail service. The post office needed a special stamp for this new and exciting method of transportation. The result was a 24-cent airmail stamp featuring the Curtiss JN-4 biplane, an aircraft that became famously known as the Jenny. The stamp was printed using two colors, with a red frame surrounding a blue airplane in the center. At the time, nobody could have imagined that a simple printing mistake would eventually turn this 24-cent stamp into one of the most valuable pieces of paper in American collecting history during the printing process. The red frame and blue airplane were printed separately. Somehow, one sheet containing 100 stamps was printed with the blue airplane upside down. The error was not caught during the production process, and the sheet was released to the public. That means only 100 original examples of the famous inverted Jenny were produced from that sheet. Today, those surviving stamps are among the most closely watched and highly prized items in American philately. The discovery of the famous sheet is almost as fascinating as the stamp itself. On May 14, 1918, a stamp collector named William T. Roby purchased a complete sheet of 100 of the new 24-cent airmail stamps from a post office in Washington, D.C. When he looked at the stamps, he immediately noticed something was wrong. Every airplane on the sheet was upside down. Roby realized that he had discovered something extremely unusual, and the story of the inverted Jenny had begun. Roby had paid only $24 for the complete sheet because each stamp had a face value of 24 cents. But after discovering the error, he understood that the sheet could be worth far more than its face value. Postal officials also learned about the mistake and wanted the sheet recovered. Instead of simply returning it, Roby sold the sheet to Philadelphia stamp dealer Eugene Klein for $15,000. Klein later sold it to the famous collector Colonel Edward H. R. Green for $20,000. The sheet was eventually divided, and the individual stamps entered the collections of some of the most important collectors in the world. This is where the value of the inverted Jenny becomes truly incredible. The original face value of the stamp was only 24 cents, but an authentic inverted Jenny is not worth 24 cents today, and it is not simply worth a few dollars because it is old. Genuine examples have sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and some have reached the $1 million level. In 2023, one individual inverted Jenny reportedly sold for approximately $2 million at auction. That is an unbelievable transformation from a 20% postage stamp into a multi-million-dollar collectible. There is an important reason why this stamp can command such extraordinary prices. It is not simply because the stamp is more than 100 years old. There are millions of old stamps around the world that are more than a century old and are worth very little. The inverted Jenny is different because it combines extreme rarity, a dramatic visual error, important American history, aviation history, a famous discovery story, and enormous demand from serious collectors. The airplane shown on the stamp is also historically significant. The Curtiss JN-4, commonly called the Jenny, became closely associated with the beginning of American airmail service. In 1918, aviation was still a relatively new technology, and the idea of carrying mail by airplane represented a major development in transportation and communication. The inverted Jenny therefore connects two important areas of American history: the development of aviation and the development of the modern postal system. Now take a close look at the design. The outer frame is red, while the airplane in the center is blue. The words United States Postage appear across the top, while the large 24-cent denomination appears at the bottom and on both sides. Everything looks normal except for one extraordinary detail. The airplane is completely upside down. That visual mistake is what gives the stamp its famous name, the inverted Jenny. But there is something extremely important that every collector needs to understand. Not every 1918 24-cent Jenny stamp is worth millions of dollars. The normal 24-cent airmail stamp has the airplane printed in the correct orientation. The famous inverted variety is a separate and exceptionally rare error. in the Scott's Specialized Catalog of United States Stamps and Covers. The famous inverted Jenny is identified as Scott C3A, while the normal issue is Scott C3. This distinction is extremely important because photographs and online listings can sometimes create unrealistic expectations. Someone may see an old 24-cent airmail stamp and immediately assume it is an inverted Jenny, but an authentic example needs to be carefully examined and properly authenticated, because genuine inverted Jennies are extremely valuable. The market has a strong reason for experts to carefully examine their authenticity, condition, gum, centering, perforations, cancellations, and history. Condition can also have a major impact on value. Serious collectors look at the centering of the design, the condition of the perforations, the original gum, paper quality, cancellations, creases, tears, thinning, stains, repairs, and other imperfections. A beautifully preserved example with excellent centering and strong provenance can be much more desirable than an example with significant faults. In the world of rare stamps, even very small differences in condition can make a substantial difference in price. The position of an inverted Jenny on the original sheet can also be important to specialists. The original sheet contained 100 stamps, and collectors have studied the individual positions and histories of surviving examples. Over the decades, particular inverted Jennies have become famous because of their previous owners' auction histories, condition, and provenance. Each surviving stamp can have a fascinating story of its own. The inverted Jenny also demonstrates one of the most interesting principles in stamp collecting. Sometimes a mistake can be worth far more than perfection. If the airplane had been printed correctly, the stamp would have been an important early airmail issue, but the printing error transformed it into a legendary rarity. A mistake that should have been caught during production escaped into the public and became one of the most recognizable errors in philatelic history. Imagine what this stamp has witnessed since 1918. It comes from the era when American airmail service was just beginning. It was produced during World War I, passed through the hands of collectors and dealers, entered famous collections, appeared in major auctions, and became one of the most recognizable stamps in the world. More than a century later, collectors still search for information about these tiny pieces of paper. This is also why the inverted Jenny is such an important lesson for anyone who collects stamps. Never judge an old stamp only by its age. Learn how to identify it correctly. Look at the denomination, design, colors, perforations, printing characteristics, and possible errors. Then compare the stamp with a recognized catalog and for valuable material. Seek professional authentication. If you ever believe that you have discovered a genuine inverted Jenny, do not clean it, press it, glue it, repair it, or attempt to improve its appearance yourself. Do not remove it aggressively from an album or envelope. Valuable stamps should be handled carefully because amateur repairs can permanently reduce their value. If the stamp appears potentially significant, professional examination should come before any attempt to sell it. It is also important not to believe every enormous price that you see in an online listing. Anyone can put an old stamp online and ask for millions of dollars, but an asking price is not the same as an actual sale. Real market value is established through documented transactions, reputable auctions, recognized catalogs, professional dealers, and authentication. The inverted Jenny is genuinely valuable, but its extraordinary value comes from its documented rarity and history, not simply from someone placing a huge price tag on it. The most amazing part of the inverted Jenny story is the transformation that took place. The original sheet cost only $24 because it contained 100 stamps with a face value of 24 cents each, yet the individual stamps eventually became objects worth hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars. A simple printing error became a legendary piece of American history, from 24 cents to millions of dollars. The inverted Jenny represents one of the most dramatic value stories in the entire world of stamp collecting. It combines the excitement of aviation, the history of the American postal system, the art of stamp design, the importance of printing errors, and the passion of collectors who are willing to pay extraordinary amounts for something truly rare. So, if you have an old collection at home, take another look at it. Check those forgotten albums, envelopes, family collections, and boxes of old stamps. You may not discover an inverted Jenny because genuine examples are exceptionally rare, but you could still find an interesting error, variety, early airmail stamp, or historically important issue that you never knew you had. Next up, we are taking a close look at the beautiful green 1-cent George Washington stamp shown here. At first glance, it may look like just another old postage stamp, but this little piece of paper comes from an important 1932 commemorative issue created to celebrate the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth. The stamp shown here is the 1932 United States 1-cent Washington bicentennial stamp, identified by collectors as Scott's 705. It was issued on January 1, 1932, as part of a 12-stamp Washington bicentennial series. The series was created to honor the 200th anniversary of Washington's birth, and each denomination featured a different portrait of George Washington based on famous works of art. The National Postal Museum identifies the 1-cent green stamp as being inspired by the famous bust of Washington created by French sculptor Jean-Antoine Houdon. Look closely at the stamp in the image. The portrait of Washington dominates the design, with his name appearing on the right side and the large 1-cent denomination positioned toward the lower left. The words U.S. postage appear along the bottom. The entire stamp is printed in green, giving it a classic appearance that immediately stands out among the colorful stamps of the Washington bicentennial series. The history behind the portrait is especially fascinating. Jean-Antoine Houdon was one of the most respected sculptors of his time. His Washington bust was created after Houdon traveled to America and spent time studying George Washington. The resulting likeness became one of the artistic sources used for the 1932 Washington bicentennial stamps. So when you look at this small green stamp, you are not simply looking at a portrait printed on paper. You are looking at a postal interpretation of an important work of American art. The technical details make this stamp even easier for collectors to identify. Scott's 705 was produced by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing using a rotary press, and it has perforations measuring approximately 11 by 10. Catalog references identify the stamp as a 1-cent green Washington bicentennial issue from 1932, but now comes the question almost every collector wants answered. How much could this old Washington stamp actually be worth today? The answer may surprise you. An ordinary example of Scott's 705 is not normally a huge money stamp. Current catalog and dealer references put ordinary mint examples around a few tens of cents, with used examples commonly around $0.25. For example, a 2025 U.S. stamp catalog lists Scott's 705 at about 30 cents for mint never hinged and 25 cents used, while current dealer listings also show ordinary examples around the 40-cent range. That means you should not believe anyone who claims that every 1932 1-cent Washington stamp is automatically worth thousands or millions of dollars. The majority of ordinary examples are common collectibles. However, that does not mean you should simply ignore the stamp. Condition, centering, gum, perforations, varieties, multiples, and special items can make a major difference in the collector market. One of the most important factors is condition. If your stamp has been used, examine the cancellation carefully. Is the cancellation light and away from Washington's face, or does it completely cover the portrait? Are the perforations complete and undamaged? Is there a crease, tear, stain, thin spot, or other defect? These details can affect desirability and value. If your stamp is unused, collectors will also examine the gum. Original gum with no hinge disturbance is generally more desirable than a stamp with heavy hinge marks or damaged gum. A stamp with exceptionally fresh color, excellent centering, and no faults can be significantly more attractive to advanced collectors than an ordinary example. Centering is another important factor. Look carefully at the white space between the printed design and the perforations. When a stamp is unusually well centered, especially when it approaches the highest quality grades, collectors can pay a premium. A remarkable example of Scott's 705 with exceptional centering, original gum, and a professional certificate has appeared in auction records with an estimate of $30 to $40 and realized $24. That demonstrates how quality can move an otherwise inexpensive stamp into a much higher range. This is an important lesson for anyone searching for valuable stamps. The catalog value of an ordinary stamp does not tell the entire story. A superbly centered and professionally graded example can attract much more attention than a damaged or poorly centered copy. Another interesting possibility is a plate block or larger multiple. A single Scott 705 may have a modest value, but plate blocks can be more desirable because they preserve additional information about the original printing. Current dealer listings show Scott 705 plate blocks priced around several dollars, while catalog references also list plate block values higher than the value of an ordinary single, and this is where experienced collectors begin looking beyond the face of the stamp. Instead of asking only, "How old is this stamp?" they ask, "Exactly which stamp is this? How was it produced? What condition is it in? And does it have anything unusual?" That is the right approach. The 1932 Washington bicentennial issue is particularly interesting because it contains 12 different denominations from the half-cent through the 10-cent stamp. Each stamp features a different artistic representation of George Washington. The 1-cent green stamp is the Howden-inspired portrait, while other denominations use portraits connected with artists, such as Charles Willson Peale and Gilbert Stuart. The entire set has become a popular collectible because it tells a visual story of Washington through different portraits. Today, collectors often seek complete sets, blocks, plate blocks, first-day covers, and exceptionally well-preserved individual examples. There is also an important historical point about how many of these stamps were produced. Scott 705 was issued in a very large quantity, with more than 1.2 billion stamps produced according to current dealer references. That large production number helps explain why ordinary examples remain relatively affordable today. So if you have one of these stamps, do not be disappointed if it is not worth hundreds or thousands of dollars. Its value is not necessarily about becoming rich. Its real appeal is that it is more than 90 years old and connects directly to one of the most important figures in American history. However, collectors should always keep their eyes open for exceptional examples. A stamp with extraordinary centering, pristine original gum, a professional certificate, a desirable plate block, or another recognized specialty can be much more interesting than a standard used copy. And remember, online asking prices can be misleading. Someone may list an ordinary old stamp for an enormous amount of money, but an asking price is not proof of actual market value. When evaluating a stamp, it is much better to look at recognized catalogs, reputable dealers, auction results, and documented sales. If you believe your stamp may be an unusually valuable example, do not clean it or attempt to repair it yourself. Do not remove stains, press wrinkles, alter perforations, or try to improve the appearance. Amateur restoration can actually reduce the value of collectible stamps. Keep the stamp safe and have it examined by someone experienced in U.S. philately if you think there is something unusual about it. The 1932 1-cent Washington bicentennial stamp may not be $1 million rarity like the legendary inverted Jenny, but it is still an important piece of American postal history. It was issued during a major national celebration. It features an artistic interpretation of George Washington, and it has survived for more than 9 decades. Imagine this stamp being used on an envelope in 1932. The United States was experiencing the Great Depression, and Americans were celebrating the bicentennial of Washington's birth. This tiny green stamp could have traveled across the country carrying a letter, a bill, a family message, or an important business document. More than 90 years later, it can still be sitting inside a collection, preserving a tiny piece of that era. That is what makes stamp collecting so exciting. You are not simply collecting paper. You are collecting history. So, what is the realistic value of the stamp shown here? For an ordinary example of Scott 705, current references generally place it around the range of a few tens of cents, depending on whether it is mint or used and on its condition. Exceptionally well-centered, high-grade examples can sell for more, while plate blocks and other specialized material can carry additional premiums. The most important thing is accurate identification. If you find this green Washington stamp in an old album, look for the 1-cent denomination, the Washington portrait, the green color, and the characteristics associated with Scott 705. Then examine its condition carefully before trying to determine its market value. And never forget that condition can be everything in philately. 2 stamps that look almost identical to the average person can have completely different values to an advanced collector because of centering, gum, perforations, flaws, grading, or provenance. So take another look at your old stamp albums. Search through those forgotten collections and family envelopes. You may not find a multi-million-dollar rarity, but you could discover a beautifully preserved example, a scarce variety, a plate block, or another interesting piece of American postal history. Next up, we are taking a close look at the beautiful 1930 1-cent George Washington bicentennial stamp shown here. This classic stamp may look simple at first, but it comes from one of the most important commemorative stamp series ever produced by the United States Postal Service. The stamp shown here is the 1932 United States 1-cent Washington bicentennial stamp, Scott 706. It was issued to celebrate the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth. The National Postal Museum identifies this issue as Scott 706 and records its date of January 1st, 1932. It was printed by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, using engraved printing, and has perforations measuring approximately 11 by 10. Look carefully at the portrait. Washington is shown in profile, facing toward the right, with his hair pulled back in the style associated with the 18th century. The design is surrounded by an architectural frame, with columns on both sides and the words United States postage across the top. At the bottom, you can see the large 1-cent denomination, along with the dates 1732 and 1932 and the name, Washington. Those dates are extremely important because they identify the stamp as part of the National Bicentennial Celebration. The portrait used for this stamp has a fascinating artistic history. The image was inspired by a 1772 painting of George Washington by the famous American artist Charles Willson Peale. The painting is known as the Virginia Colonel because it shows Washington during his earlier years, long before he became the first president of the United States. The National Postal Museum specifically identifies the 1-cent Washington bicentennial stamp as being based on Peale's 1772 portrait. That makes this little postage stamp much more than an old piece of paper. The image connects American postal history with American art and the early life of George Washington. When you look at the portrait, you are seeing a postal version of an image created when Washington was still a Virginia colonel. Decades before the United States had a president named George Washington, the stamp was released on January 1st, 1932, as part of the Washington Bicentennial Series. The series contained 12 different denominations, and each stamp presented Washington at a different stage of his life or through a different famous artistic representation. The 1-cent denomination occupies an interesting place in the series because it uses the Virginia Colonel portrait from 1772. The production numbers are also important when determining value. Approximately 304,926,800 examples of Scott 706 were issued. That is a very large number, and it explains why an ordinary example of this stamp is generally not a high-dollar rarity today. Current specialist references list the normal single stamp at modest prices, with one current dealer listing a single at around $0.6 and a 2025 catalog listing approximately $0.4 for mint never hinged and $0.5 for used examples. So, if you have this exact stamp in an ordinary used condition, you should not automatically believe claims that it is worth thousands or millions of dollars. The majority of surviving examples are common collectibles. However, that does not mean every example has the same value. In stamp collecting, condition and rarity within an issue can make a tremendous difference. One of the first things an expert collector will examine is the condition of the stamp. Look at the perforations around the edges. Are they complete and sharp, or are some missing or damaged? Then examine the paper for tears, creases, thin spots, stains, or other damage. A stamp that has survived for more than 90 years without major defects is naturally more attractive to collectors. Centering is another extremely important factor. Look at the amount of white space between the printed design and the perforations. If the design is unusually well centered, the stamp can become much more desirable. For common stamps, a normal example may be inexpensive, while an exceptionally centered, high-grade example can attract serious attention from advanced collectors. The gum is especially important if the stamp is unused. Collectors distinguish between hinged, lightly hinged, and mint never hinged examples. Original gum that has never been disturbed can make a major difference in desirability. Current specialist references list mint never hinged examples of Scott 706 around the sub-dollar range in ordinary quality, but exceptional certified examples can command dramatically higher premiums because of their condition and grade. In fact, There are documented examples showing just how dramatically quality can change the value of an otherwise inexpensive stamp. An exceptionally centered Scott 706 with fresh color, original gum, and a professional certificate received a Gem 100 grade in a specialized population report, with a reported market value of around $700 at the time. That does not mean every Scott 706 is worth $700. It demonstrates something much more important. An ordinary stamp and an extraordinary condition rarity can be completely different collecting opportunities. Another area collectors should watch is the plate block. A single stamp is one thing, but a plate block preserves a larger portion of the original printing and includes plate number information. Current dealer references list a Scott 706 plate block of 4 at approximately $27.5, considerably more than an ordinary single stamp. This is why experienced collectors do not simply ask, "Is this an old stamp?" Instead, they ask, "What exact catalog number is it? How many were issued? What is its condition? Is it mint or used? How is it centered? Does it have original gum? Is it part of a block? Does it have a plate number? Does it have a recognized variety or specialty?" Those questions can completely change the evaluation. There is also an important color detail worth mentioning. Although the image shown here appears strongly green because of the photograph or scan, Scott 706 is cataloged as a brown or light brown 1-cent Washington bicentennial stamp. The National Postal Museum describes its medium as brown ink, and current specialist references also identify the issue as brown. That means collectors should be careful when identifying a stamp from a digital photograph alone. Lighting, scanning, camera settings, age, and image processing can change the appearance of the paper and ink. For an important identification, it is better to compare the physical stamp with a recognized catalog or expert reference. Another interesting technical detail is the printing process. Scott 706 was produced by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing using a rotary press. The perforation measurement is approximately 11 by 10. These technical characteristics help collectors distinguish the stamp from other Washington issues and are especially important when researching varieties or confirming catalog identification. The stamp was printed in panes, and specialist references record plate numbers associated with the issue. This is another reason why a larger multiple or plate block can be much more interesting than an ordinary single. Collectors of U.S. stamps often enjoy studying these details because they provide a connection to the original manufacturing process at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. Now, imagine this stamp being used on an envelope in 1932. The United States was in the middle of the Great Depression, and the country was celebrating the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth. Millions of people were seeing these commemorative stamps on letters and packages. At the time, the stamp was simply postage. Today, it is a surviving piece of American history. That is one of the greatest attractions of collecting stamps. A stamp can travel through history. It can be placed on an envelope carried across the country, delivered to a family, saved in an album, forgotten for decades, and eventually discovered by a collector. The piece of paper remains small, but the story behind it becomes larger with time. If you find one of these stamps in an old collection, do not immediately try to clean it or improve its appearance. Never use chemicals, water, adhesive, or amateur restoration techniques on a potentially collectible stamp. Cleaning or repairing an old stamp can permanently damage it and may actually reduce its value. Instead, handle it carefully and examine it under good lighting. Check the denomination, portrait, dates, perforations, centering, gum, and overall condition. If you believe you have an unusually high-grade example or something that does not look normal, professional evaluation can be worthwhile. And there is another important lesson for collectors. An asking price online is not the same thing as market value. You may find ordinary 1932 Washington stamps listed online for extremely high prices, but anyone can create an unrealistic listing. The better way to estimate value is to compare recognized catalog information, reputable dealer prices, and documented auction results for the normal Scott 706. The realistic market is generally modest. Current references show ordinary examples around the range of a few cents to under $1, depending on condition and whether the stamp is mint or used. but exceptional certified examples, plate blocks, and other specialized material can be worth substantially more, and that is exactly why you should never throw an old stamp away without checking it first. The stamp may not be a multi-million-dollar rarity, but it could be a beautifully preserved example, part of a valuable set, a plate block, or a high-grade item that deserves closer attention. The 1932 Washington Bicentennial Series is especially fascinating because it gives collectors 12 different artistic views of George Washington. The series was designed as a major national commemoration, and the stamps continue to attract collectors because the 1932 Washington Bicentennial Series is especially fascinating because it gives collectors 12 different artistic views of George Washington. The series was designed as a major national commemoration, and the stamps continue to attract collectors because they combine history, art, engraving, postal history, and the story of America's first president. The 1-cent stamp is particularly interesting because its portrait goes all the way back to 1772. When Washington was still a Virginia colonel, Charles Willson Peale's portrait captured Washington decades before his presidency, and that image was eventually transformed into a tiny engraved postage stamp for the 1932 Bicentennial Celebration. So, what is the real value of the stamp shown here? For an ordinary example of Scott 706, don't expect a fortune. Current catalog and dealer information places normal examples in the low-value collectible range. However, a superbly centered, mint never hinged, professionally certified example can be dramatically more valuable, and plate blocks or other specialized material can also carry significant premiums. The most important thing is accurate identification. If your stamp matches the 1932 1-cent Washington Bicentennial design, has the 1732 and 1932 dates, and features the Virginia Colonel portrait, you are likely looking at Scott 706. But always verify the details before assigning a value. This stamp may not have the enormous value of famous rarities like the inverted Jenny, but it represents something just as important to a collector, history that has survived. It connects us to George Washington, Charles Willson Peale, the American Bicentennial Celebration of 1932, and the early history of U.S. commemorative postage. So take another look through those old albums, envelopes, and family collections. You may not find $1 million stamp, but you could discover an exceptional condition example, a valuable plate block, a rare variety, or another piece of American postal history that deserves a closer look. If you enjoyed this expert look at the 1932 1-cent Washington Bicentennial stamp, make sure you subscribe to Stamps Us for more fascinating deep olive green hue and the timeless portrait, without ever suspecting that a rare perforation variety, an experimental watermarked paper, or a misplaced plate number could command a staggering market value reaching $1.6 million or more among elite collectors and high net worth investors. Welcome back to Stamp Us, where we dive deep into the fascinating, high-stakes world of rare American philately. Today, we are expanding our journey into the legendary realm of U.S. definitive issues, focusing on the intricate mechanics of stamp production, the hidden nuances of expert authentication, and the astronomical financial valuations that turn unassuming pieces of postal paper into crown jewels of global collections. These tiny perforations and engraved portraits are far more than simple postage to mail letters across a developing nation. They are rare surviving artifacts of a pre-digital era when physical communication was the lifeblood of commerce, politics, and human connection. To truly understand why advanced collectors and institutional buyers obsess over these specific definitive issues, we have to examine the sheer scale of 19th and early 20th century postal expansion in America. Millions upon millions of these 1-cent green and multi-cent Washington and Franklin stamps rolled off printing presses to satisfy the daily demands of a rapidly industrializing republic. Yet, paradoxically, it is this massive industrial-scale production that created the conditions for extreme rarity. When a single sheet slipped through rigorous quality control with inverted center designs, incorrect perforation gauges, experimental coil experiments, or uncommon paper types, it instantly transitioned from everyday stationery into a legendary collector's holy grail. Consider the extraordinary financial realities governing top-tier American philately today. While standard used copies of common definitive issues can be acquired easily for pocket change, pristine, never-hinged specimens featuring original gum and certified by premier grading bodies like the Philatelic Foundation routinely shatter records at high-end auction houses. Elite investors, family offices, and dedicated numismatic and philatelic collectors compete fiercely for ultimate-grade rarities, driving market prices into the 6- and 7-figure territory. Marquee production errors and premier condition 19th-century rarities have seen benchmark hammer prices soar past the $1.6 million threshold, cementing top-tier stamps as a formidable alternative asset class capable of rivaling fine art and rare coins. Think about the incredible human stories and accidental discoveries hidden behind these collections. In many cases, world-class philatelic rarities were uncovered completely by chance, tucked away inside dusty Victorian diaries, forgotten family albums resting in forgotten attic trunks, or old mercantile ledgers belonging to 19th-century business owners. Imagine the heart-accelerating realization of an ordinary person opening an old estate book at a local sale and stumbling upon a rare experimental coil or an unrecorded Miss Perf variety that instantly transforms a modest box of old paper into a $1.6 million windfall. It is this perpetual possibility of hidden, unheralded treasure that keeps the global philatelic community vibrant, active, and relentless across generations. The craftsmanship behind these issues is an absolute marvel worth pausing to analyze in depth. Unlike modern high-speed digital or offset printing, classic stamp production relied entirely on steel die engraving, where master craftsmen carved mirror images into hardened metal with extraordinary precision under high-powered magnifying lenses. Every shadow on Washington's coat, every intricate curl of his powdered wig, and every microscopic letter forming the words U.S. postage was painstakingly hand-etched. When specialized ink met high rag content paper under immense printing press pressure, it produced a tactile, slightly raised print quality that modern reproduction techniques simply cannot replicate. Placing these stamps in their proper historical context reveals how closely they mirrored the rapid modernization and geographic expansion of the United States. They traveled across the expanding American frontier strapped into mail cars on the Transcontinental Railroad, crossed harsh plains in the hands of courageous express riders during transitional eras, and validated letters carrying news of monumental national events, industrial innovations, personal triumphs, and heartbreaks. A single 1-cent stamp witnessed the transformation of a young post-colonial nation into a global industrial powerhouse, serving as a silent, loyal witness to history unfolding one letter at a time for anyone looking to start, expand, or elevate their own journey into stamp collecting. Navigating this market requires a blend of historical curiosity, archival preservation, and rigorous expert authentication. Whether you are building a specialized study of definitive Washington issues, hunting for elusive cancellation marks from pioneer post offices, or studying the subtle color shades caused by changing chemical ink formulas, the pursuit demands patience and an eye for detail. Every single stamp carries a distinct provenance, a documented chain of custody connecting the modern collector directly to the postal clerks, merchants, and citizens of the 1800s and early 1900s. Ultimately, these small green rectangles remind us that human history is preserved in the most unexpected, quiet corners of our world. They challenge us to look closer at everyday objects, to value the supreme artistry of past craftsmen, and to appreciate how the smallest artifacts can carry the heaviest historical narratives and the highest market values. Whether secured safely within elite museum vaults or traded actively by passionate hobbyists at prestigious auction houses, these stamps continue to bridge the vast gap between yesterday and today. What is the rarest or most unusual collectible you have ever discovered in an unexpected place, and what story do you think it holds? Next up, we are exploring the legendary journey of early 20th century Washington Franklin definitive issues, focusing on the intricate mechanics of stamp production, the hidden nuances of expert authentication, and the astronomical financial valuations that turn unassuming pieces of postal paper into crown jewels of global collections. These tiny perforations and engraved portraits are far more than simple postage to mail letters across a developing nation. They are rare surviving artifacts of a pre-digital era when physical communication was the lifeblood of commerce, politics, and human connection. To truly understand why advanced collectors and institutional buyers obsess over these specific definitive issues, we have to examine the sheer scale of early 20th century postal expansion in America. Millions upon millions of these 1-cent green Franklin and Washington stamps rolled off rotary and flatbed presses at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing to satisfy the daily demands of a rapidly industrializing republic. Yet, paradoxically, it is this massive industrial-scale production that created the conditions for extreme rarity. When a single sheet slipped through rigorous quality control with incorrect perforation gauges, experimental coil experiments, or uncommon watermarked paper types, it instantly transitioned from everyday stationery into a legendary collector's holy grail. Consider the extraordinary financial realities governing top-tier American philately today. While standard used copies of common definitive issues can be acquired easily for pocket change, pristine, never-hinged specimens featuring original gum and certified by premier grading bodies like the Philatelic Foundation routinely shatter records at high-end auction houses. Elite investors, family offices, and dedicated numismatic and philatelic collectors compete fiercely for ultimate-grade rarities, driving market prices into the 6- and 7-figure territory. Marquee production errors and premier condition 20th century rarities have seen benchmark hammer prices soar past the $1.6 million threshold, cementing elite stamps as a formidable alternative asset class capable of rivaling fine art and rare coins. Think about the incredible human stories and accidental discoveries hidden behind these collections. In many cases, world-class philatelic rarities were uncovered completely by chance, tucked away inside dusty Victorian diaries, forgotten family albums resting in forgotten attic trunks, or old mercantile ledgers belonging to early 20th century business owners. Imagine the heart-accelerating realization of an ordinary person opening an old estate book at a local sale and stumbling upon a rare experimental coil or an unrecorded misperf variety that instantly transforms a modest box of old paper into a $1.6 million windfall. It is this perpetual possibility of hidden, unheralded treasure that keeps the global philatelic community vibrant, active, and relentless across generations. The craftsmanship behind these issues is an absolute marvel worth pausing to analyze in depth. Unlike modern high-speed digital or offset printing, classic stamp production relied entirely on steel die engraving, where master craftsmen carved mirror images into hardened metal with extraordinary precision under high-powered magnifying lenses. Every shadow on Franklin's coat, every curl of his hair, and every microscopic letter forming the words United States postage was painstakingly hand-etched. When specialized ink met high rag content paper under immense printing press pressure, it produced a tactile, slightly raised print quality that modern reproduction techniques simply cannot replicate. Placing these stamps in their proper historical context reveals how closely they mirrored the rapid modernization and geographic expansion of the United States. They traveled across the expanding American frontier strapped into mail cars on the Transcontinental Railroad, crossed bustling cities during the dawn of the aviation age, and validated letters carrying news of monumental national events, industrial innovations, personal triumphs, and heartbreaks. A single 1-cent Franklin stamp witnessed an era of immense national transformation, serving as a silent, loyal witness to history unfolding one letter at a time for anyone looking to start, expand, or elevate their own journey into stamp collecting. Navigating this market requires a blend of historical curiosity, archival preservation, and rigorous expert authentication. Whether you are building a specialized study of definitive Franklin issues, hunting for elusive cancellation marks from pioneer post offices, or studying the subtle color shades caused by changing chemical ink formulas, the pursuit demands patience and an eye for detail. Every single stamp carries a distinct provenance, a documented chain of custody connecting the modern collector directly to the postal clerks, merchants, and citizens of the 1900s. Ultimately, these small green rectangles remind us that human history is preserved in the most unexpected, quiet corners of our world. They challenge us to look closer at everyday objects, to value the supreme artistry of past craftsmen, and to appreciate how the smallest artifacts can carry the heaviest historical narratives and the highest market values. Whether secured safely within elite museum vaults or traded actively by passionate hobbyists at prestigious auction houses, These stamps continue to bridge the vast gap between yesterday and today. What is the rarest or most unusual definitive stamp you have ever discovered in an unexpected place, and what story do you think it holds? Next up, where we dive deep into the fascinating, high-stakes world of rare American philately. Today, we are expanding our journey into the legendary realm of the Washington Bicentennial Commemorative Series, focusing on the intricate mechanics of steel die engraving, the rich historical context of the Great Depression era, and the astronomical financial valuations that turn unassuming pieces of postal paper into crown jewels of elite collections. These miniature works of art are far more than simple postage used to mail letters across a recovering nation. They are rare surviving artifacts of a defining moment when America paused to honor its founding father amidst unprecedented economic turmoil. To truly understand why advanced collectors and institutional investors obsess over these specific commemorative issues, we have to examine the cultural and economic backdrop of 1932. Released during the depths of the Great Depression, the Washington Bicentennial set was not just a functional postal requirement. It was a massive nationwide cultural event designed to instill national pride, unity, and hope. The Post Office Department collaborated closely with the Bicentennial Commission, utilizing Howden's famous bust of Washington to create a stunning 12-value definitive-style commemorative set. Yet, paradoxically, while millions were printed to satisfy public demand, finding pristine, perfectly centered specimens with original gum intact has turned into a high-stakes hunt for modern connoisseurs. Consider the extraordinary financial realities governing top-tier American philately today. While standard used or hinged copies of the 1-cent green bicentennial stamp can be acquired easily for pocket change, flawless, never-hinged blocks of 4 imperforate errors, or certified high-grade single stamps graded by professional services routinely shatter records. Elite investors, family offices, and dedicated numismatic and philatelic collectors compete fiercely for ultimate-grade rarities, driving market prices into the 6- and 7-figure territory. Premier condition 20th-century commemorative rarities and major plate number blocks have seen benchmark hammer prices soar past the $1.6 million threshold, cementing elite stamps as a formidable alternative asset class capable of rivaling fine art and rare coins. Think about the incredible human stories and accidental discoveries hidden behind these collections. In many cases, world-class philatelic rarities were uncovered completely by chance, tucked away inside dusty family scrapbooks, forgotten estate trunks resting in forgotten attics, or old correspondence belonging to stamp collectors who bought sheets directly from post offices in 1932 and locked them away for decades. Imagine the heart-accelerating realization of an ordinary person opening an old box at a local estate sale and stumbling upon an unrecorded layout error, a rare double impression, or a pristine sheet of 1-cent greens that instantly transforms a modest box of paper into a $1.6 million windfall. It is this perpetual possibility of hidden, unheralded treasure that keeps the global philatelic community vibrant, active, and relentless across generations. The craftsmanship behind these bicentennial issues is an absolute marvel worth pausing to analyze in depth. Unlike modern high-speed digital or offset printing, classic stamp production relied entirely on steel die engraving, where master craftsmen carved mirror images into hardened metal with extraordinary precision under high-powered magnifying lenses. Every architectural pillar framing Washington's portrait, every delicate leaf in the laurel accents, and every microscopic letter forming the words United States postage was painstakingly hand-etched. When specialized ink met high-quality paper under immense printing press pressure, it produced a tactile, slightly raised print quality that modern reproduction techniques simply cannot replicate. Placing these stamps in their proper historical context reveals how deeply they resonated with a public searching for stability and historical continuity. They traveled across the country on passenger rail lines, carried letters bearing news of hardship and resilience during the 1930s, and served as portable monuments to the birth of the nation. A single 1-cent green bicentennial stamp witnessed an era of monumental national transformation, acting as a silent, loyal witness to history unfolding one letter at a time while keeping the memory of George Washington alive in millions of American households. For anyone looking to start, expand, or elevate their own journey into stamp collecting, Navigating this market requires a blend of historical curiosity, archival preservation, and rigorous expert authentication. Whether you are building a specialized study of the 1930 to bicentennial series, hunting for elusive first-day covers with cachets from Mount Vernon, or studying the subtle shade variations caused by changing chemical ink formulas during the printing runs, the pursuit demands patience and an eye for detail. Every single stamp carries a distinct provenance, a documented chain of custody connecting the modern collector directly to the postal clerks, merchants, and citizens of the 1930s. Ultimately, these small green rectangles remind us that human history is preserved in the most unexpected, quiet corners of our world. They challenge us to look closer at everyday objects, to value the supreme artistry of past craftsmen, and to appreciate how the smallest artifacts can carry the heaviest historical narratives and the highest market values. Whether secured safely within elite museum vaults or traded actively by passionate hobbyists at prestigious auction houses, these stamps continue to bridge the vast gap between yesterday and today. Next up, where we dive deep into the fascinating, high-stakes world of rare American philately. Today, we are expanding our journey into the legendary realm of the 1943 For Freedom's commemorative issue, focusing on the meticulous steel die engraving, the rich historical context of World War II mobilization, and the enduring legacy that turns these wartime postal pieces into treasured staples of a collection. These miniature works of art are far more than simple postage used to mail letters across a mobilizing nation. They are poignant wartime artifacts capturing a defining moment when President Franklin D. Roosevelt's vision of global human rights was etched directly into the nation's mail system. To truly understand why collectors and historians obsess over this specific issue, we have to examine the cultural and geopolitical backdrop of February 1943, issued during the height of World War II. The stamp was based on painter Norman Rockwell's famous illustrations of the Four Freedoms, which had deeply inspired the American public during a time of global uncertainty. Unlike many standard definitive issues of the era, the Four Freedoms stamp was enthusiastically welcomed by citizens and collectors alike, who felt the design perfectly embodied the democratic ideals the nation was fighting to protect. Over 1.2 billion copies rolled off the rotary presses at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, serving as a constant daily reminder on letters moving between home fronts and battlefields overseas. Consider the marketplace realities and collecting dynamics surrounding this classic issue today. While standard used or mint singles remain widely accessible for a fraction of a dollar, advanced philatelists seek out pristine mint, never-hinged blocks, complete plate number blocks, and immaculate full sheets that showcase the vibrant bright blue-green shade intended by the Bureau. Assembling specialized collections of wartime commemoratives or studying first-day covers carrying patriotic cachets offers modern hobbyists a tangible, highly engaging connection to the emotional fabric of the 1940s. Think about the incredible human stories and personal archives hidden behind these collections. In many cases, these stamps were saved by families preserving letters sent from soldiers training in domestic camps or fighting across European and Pacific theaters. Imagine opening an old trunk or a packet of wartime correspondence and finding envelopes bearing the 1-cent green stamp, each one carrying messages of hope, anxiety, and enduring love across vast oceans. It is this powerful connection to personal and national history that keeps the appreciation for mid-century U.S. commemoratives so resilient. The craftsmanship behind the issue remains an absolute marvel worth analyzing in depth. Utilizing precise rotary press printing methods, master engravers captured the fine lines of Liberty's facial features, the flickering texture of the torch flame, and the crisp, legible lettering of the historic proclamation. When specialized green ink met paper under tight wartime resource constraints, it produced an iconic visual style that defined an entire era of American postal history and graphic art for anyone looking to start, expand, or elevate their own journey into stamp collecting. The Four Freedoms issue is an accessible and deeply rewarding cornerstone. Whether you are building a thematic exhibit around World War II history, studying perforation measurements, or preserving full sheets, Every single stamp carries a distinct provenance connecting the modern collector directly to the citizens of 1943. Ultimately, these small green rectangles remind us that history is preserved in the most unexpected, fascinating piece of British postal history, the 1990 28-pence stamp commemorating the English Civil War. At first glance, it is just a vintage collectible, but looking closer reveals a brutal conflict that reshaped a nation and the unsung heroes who communicated across the battlefield. When we think of 17th-century warfare, we often picture armored generals, sweeping cavalry charges, and smoke-filled battlefields. We rarely think of the musicians. This specific stamp, issued by the Royal Mail to mark the 350th anniversary.
Want to master the philatelic journey? We bring you rare finds and weekly deep dives. Hit that subscribe button right now and join us. Expand your stamp collection.
Of the war's 1642 outbreak offers a unique window into this turbulent era. Instead of featuring a famous monarch or a brilliant military commander, this tiny canvas centers on a drummer. It deliberately highlights the crucial, yet often overlooked, everyday soldiers who orchestrated the chaos of a 17th-century battlefield. The artifact itself is a masterpiece of subtle design and historical irony. The text at the bottom reads, "Fought between the forces of king and parliament." This phrasing remains diplomatically neutral, refusing to take a side centuries later. Ironically, the stamp bears the modern silhouette of Queen Elizabeth II in the top left corner, resting on a tribute to a conflict that temporarily overthrew the British monarchy and led to the unprecedented trial and execution of King Charles I in 1649. The central artwork perfectly captures the authentic 1642's military aesthetic, meticulously detailing the drummer's wide-brimmed plumed hat, falling linen band collar, and vibrant, somewhat impractical attire. The drummer was specifically chosen over a cavalryman or officer because, in 1642, he served as the army's primary communication network. During the brutal pike and shot era, battlefields were deafeningly loud and completely blinded by the thick, choking black powder smoke from thousands of muskets. Verbal orders from commanders were entirely useless. Instead, generals relied on these young, unarmed, and highly vulnerable drummers to broadcast complex, memorized beats across the battlefield. These specific rhythms signal troops to load their weapons, advance into enemy fire, or sound a frantic retreat, beyond signaling maneuvers during active combat. These musicians also acted as vital battlefield diplomats. If an army needed to negotiate a temporary truce, request medical aid for the wounded, or offer terms of surrender, a drummer was sent out. They bravely crossed into the dangerous space between armies alone, beating a specific and universally recognized parley rhythm. Surviving as a drummer required immense courage, as they were deliberate targets for enemy troops hoping to sever the opposing army's line of communication. Behind the brightly dressed drummer in the foreground, the stamp's background reveals the grimmer reality of the broader conflict. Ranks of troops march carrying long spears, representing the massive blocks of pikemen who formed the absolute backbone of the era's infantry. Between 1642 and 1651, the nation was violently torn apart, splitting families and neighbors over a fundamental ideological question: did supreme power belong to the divine right of the king, or to the elected authority of Parliament? This ideological civil war was devastating. It cost an estimated 85,000 lives in direct combat and lost another 100,000 people to war-related diseases and famine. Proportionally, this conflict destroyed a larger percentage of the British population than the First World War. History is ultimately about the people who endured these eras, like the young man gripping wooden drumsticks amidst incoming cannon fire. This 28-pence stamp stands as a tribute to the unseen gears of the historical war machine. Thank you for watching Stamps Us. Remember that incredible, world-changing stories aren't just found in grand museums, but are often hiding in plain sight on a piece of paper no bigger than your thumb. Next up, we are continuing our journey into British postal history by examining another fascinating piece from the 1992 set commemorating the English Civil War. If you look at the file named Civil War Drummer, you will see a beautifully illustrated 24-pence stamp. At first glance, it is just a vintage collectible with a postmark slashed across it. but looking closer reveals the brutal, gritty reality of 17th century combat and the heavy burden borne by the era's essential infantrymen. When we think of historical warfare, we often picture sweeping cavalry charges and the dramatic smoke of early firearms. However, the absolute anchor of the 17th century battlefield was a man holding a very long stick. This specific stamp, issued by the Royal Mail to mark the 350th anniversary of the war's 1642 outbreak, centers entirely on the pikeman. It deliberately highlights the heavily armored, grueling reality of the everyday soldiers who formed the impenetrable defensive walls of the English Civil War. The artifact itself, Civil War Drummer, is a masterpiece of historical illustration. Just like its sister stamps in the series, the text at the bottom reads, "Fought between the forces of king and parliament." This phrasing remains diplomatically neutral, refusing to take a side centuries after the nation tore itself apart. The stamp also bears the modern silhouette of Queen Elizabeth II in the top right corner, a striking contrast to a stamp honoring a war that temporarily destroyed the British monarchy. The artwork meticulously captures the authentic military aesthetic of the 1640s, detailing the soldier's distinctive pikeman's pot helmet with its bright red plume, his thick leather gloves, and the heavy metal cuirass protecting his chest and thighs. The pikeman was specifically chosen for this 24p value because, during the brutal pike and shot era, he was the ultimate defensive foundation of the army. While musketeers dealt range damage, they took a massive amount of time to reload and were completely defenseless against a rushing cavalry charge. The pikemen were there to protect them. Armed with ashwood pikes that were typically 15 to 18 feet long, these soldiers would group tightly together, lowering their steel-tipped weapons to create a terrifying, impenetrable forest of spears that no horse would willingly charge into, beyond just standing still as a defensive wall. The reality of being a pikeman was physically agonizing. They wore up to 40 pounds of heavy steel armor on their upper bodies while marching miles across muddy terrain. When two opposing blocks of infantry clashed, it resulted in a horrific, claustrophobic maneuver known as the push of pike. The men would physically lock their massive weapons together and literally shove against the enemy ranks, turning the battlefield into a brutal, grinding rugby scrum of steel and muscle until one side broke and fled, behind the heavily armored soldier in the foreground. The stamp's background reveals ranks of fellow troops marching with their pikes raised to the sky, ready to form these massive blocks. Between 1642 and 1651, the nation was violently torn apart, splitting families and neighbors over a fundamental ideological question: did supreme power belong to the divine right of King Charles I, or to the elected authority of Parliament? This ideological civil war was devastating. It cost an estimated 85,000 lives in direct combat and lost another 100,000 people to war-related diseases, famine, and exposure in the very armor depicted here. Proportionally, this conflict destroyed a larger percentage of the British population than the First World War. History is ultimately about the people who endured these eras, like the exhausted, heavily burdened man gripping that long ash pole. This 24p stamp stands as a tribute to the iron discipline of the infantry. Thank you for watching Stamps Us. Remember that incredible, world-changing stories aren't just found in massive history books, but are often hiding in plain sight on a piece of paper no bigger than your thumb. Next up, we are looking at the ultimate symbol of 17th century battlefield bravery. Imagine stepping onto a battlefield where your only job is to hold a giant, brightly colored piece of fabric high in the air, effectively painting a massive target on your own back for the enemy. That was the grim reality for the man depicted on this remarkable piece of British postal history. Let's examine the file named Civil War Standard Bearer. This is the 39p value from the Royal Mail's acclaimed 1992 set marking the 350th anniversary of the outbreak of the English Civil War. While previous stamps in this series highlighted the drummers and the heavily armored pikemen, this specific illustration brings us face to face with the standard bearer. It's a striking, colorful image, but the historical context behind this figure reveals a terrifying story of devotion, tactical necessity, and almost certain death. Looking closely at the artwork, the illustrator has done an incredible job bringing the 1640s to life. Unlike the pikeman and his heavy steel plates, our standard bearer is wearing a thick leather buff coat. This unyielding, heavy leather was designed to stop the slashing edge of a cavalry sword, which was a very real threat to the man holding the flag. He wears a slouched felt hat with an ostrich feather plume, and his armored right gauntlet tightly grips the thick wooden pole of his regiment's colors. In the top left corner, hovering over this brutal scene, is the modern silhouette of Queen Elizabeth II, a fascinating inclusion for a stamp series commemorating a war that actually abolished the monarchy and executed King Charles I in 1649. But why was the standard bearer so important that he earned the highest face value in this stamp set? To understand this, we have to put ourselves in the middle of a Civil War battlefield like Edgehill or Naseby. Combat in this era was chaotic, terrifying, and completely blinded by the thick, choking white smoke created by thousands of black powder muskets. Within minutes of a battle starting, soldiers could barely see a few feet in front of them. In that blinding fog, the standard was the physical soul of the regiment. It was the only way a soldier knew where his commander was, where the front line was holding, or where to rally if the formation was broken. Because of this, the flag had to remain visible at all costs for the man chosen to carry it. The role was considered the absolute highest honor a soldier could achieve, but it was practically a suicide mission. The standard bearer was completely exposed. He couldn't carry a primary weapon because his hands were fully occupied managing a massive, heavy flag in the wind. Enemy musketeers would deliberately aim for him, knowing that if the flag fell, the opposing regiment would likely panic and scatter into the smoke. Furthermore, capturing an enemy's colors was considered the ultimate act of battlefield glory, meaning opposing soldiers would fight with desperate ferocity just to tear that flag from his hands. If we look past the bearer into the background of the stamp, we see another reason why this job was so terrifying. The artist has illustrated a fierce cavalry skirmish on the green hills behind him. This was the era of devastating cavalry shock tactics, championed by commanders like the royalist Prince Rupert and the parliamentarian Oliver Cromwell. Imagine standing your ground, holding nothing but a flagpole, while hundreds of enemy horsemen thunder toward your position. The English Civil War, which raged from 1642 to 1651, was a devastating conflict that tore communities apart over the ultimate right to rule. It resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians. This 39-pence stamp isn't just a colorful piece of postage. It is a miniature monument to the men who stood firm in the center of that unimaginable chaos, refusing to let their brothers in arms lose their guiding light in the dark smoke of war. Thank you for watching Stamps Us. If you enjoyed this historical deep dive into the stories hiding inside our postage, make sure to like the video, leave a comment below about which stamp we should cover next, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible journeys into postal history.